Welcome to What's Your Signal, the podcast exploring the latest trends in enterprise technology, network security, and the ways we connect people, places, and things. You're joined by me, Taylor Walker, and my co-host, Mauricio Steffen. Hey, Mauricio.
Hi, Taylor.
Mauricio, have you used ChatGPT much?
I sure have. In fact, I decided to try my hand at marketing, and I asked ChatGPT to come up with a few introductions for our episode today. You want me to run them by you a little bit?
Can't wait. Yeah, let's see.
All right. First one. Here we go. Today, we're diving into an electrifying topic that's shaping the world as we know it, GenAI. That's right. Generation AI, or GenAI, represents the intersection of a digitally native generation and the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence and technology.
That was a noble try. What else do you got?
All right. Okay. How about this one? How's it going, fellow AI aficionados? I hope it's going AI amazingly, because today we're diving into the world of GenAI, where the future is bright, the robots are friendly, and our social media feeds have more action than a blockbuster movie.
That one's a little bit cringy. Let's hear your next one.
All right. Last try. Try this one on for size. Together, we embark upon a voyage through the annals of time, exploring the epic of GenAI, where silicon minds and human hearts entwine. O brave new world, how these progeny of silicon chips and electric dreams doth navigate the seas of cyber and bytes.
That was certainly something. I appreciate you sharing those, Mauricio. I think no matter how we introduce it, Gen AI is as buzzy of a buzzword as you can find in the tech space. But we want to understand what it means in the real world for enterprise networks. And here to help us do that is Vice President and Principal Analyst of Moor Insights Strategy, Will Townsend, and Cradlepoint Senior Product Marketing Manager, Camille Campbell. Okay. So let's start with a definition of what exactly we're talking about. So Will, how do you define Gen AI and what kind of distinguishes it from previous generations in terms of its relationships with technology?
Yeah, Taylor, it's a great question. AI has been around for quite some time. Generative AI is different in that it uses natural language interfaces to take artificial intelligence and generate things like text, images, and data points. So it's really making the whole process of interacting with artificial intelligence that much easier.
Yeah, I agree. I think just to add to that, I think even in the short time we've seen generative AI emerge, generative AI, when it started, was about creating new material, and it was primarily text-based. But now in this short lifespan of Gen AI, we've seen it emerge to where now it can create new music, new images, and new computer code. So it's evolved and changed and getting more and more transformative.
Well, tell us a little bit about how that transformation has impacted industries. So what are some of the top use cases for Gen AI?
It's early days right now from my perspective, but where I'm seeing it really rise to the top is within help desk. So think about someone in a customer service role that can more easily get to the necessary information to address customer issues and that sort of thing. And there are also applications in field service. So if you think about a field service technician, it's usually a very highly technical troubleshoot effort in the field. And they can use devices and use a natural language interface to more quickly designate what the issue is and solve that issue.
Yeah. So I actually read an article on this, and it was an article that was put out by Google, and they actually did some research, and they surveyed retail organizations, and they asked retail organizations, okay, like how are you planning to leverage generative AI? And the top use case really aligns to exactly what Will said. It's really around customer service automation. And I think, historically, that's where we've seen AI shine. The second use case gives me a lot of anxiety, I'm not going to lie, because the second use case was around creating marketing content and compelling product descriptions and using the creativity of machines to generate compelling product descriptions that are going to resonate with their target audience. And then the third use case kind of builds on that, and it's around using Gen AI as a creative assistant and having the Gen AI tool curate images and, be able to recommend media placements based on their target audience. The fourth one was around providing more conversational commerce with their potential buying audience. So rather than, when you go online today and you're wanting to buy something online, it'll have, okay, here are all the other products we're recommending based on what you're searching for, kind of taking all that to the next level and having genuine conversations with customers. And then the fifth use case was really around providing more knowledge to store associates and on-demand training. So I thought that was pretty interesting and kind of a sector that's near and dear to Creditpoint's heart anyway.
Well, I think that's really compelling, Camille, because if you think about everything you described, generative AI is complementing the human, right?
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of concerns around AI replacing us and doing our jobs and taking our jobs away. And clearly, those use cases that you highlighted demonstrate that it's a tool that can be used to improve productivity as well as improve customer experience in retail locations. So, because I get that question often as an analyst, it's like, is Skynet going to become aware like the Terminator movies? And no, it's really it's got to be ethically used. I know we're going to get into that conversation later during the podcast, but it could be something that's used for good and improve productivity.
Yep. Like any tool, there's probably going to be multiple uses, some for good and maybe some for not good.
So speaking of those multiple uses and complementing, people and the human factor, how are our IT and OT organizations starting to use generative AI to kind of complement what they do in those functions?
Camille, do you want to take the IT part of that?
Yeah, sure. I'll take the IT portion. So, IT is not new to using AI. AI's been built into things like AIOps and SecOps. Many systems have virtual experts kind of built into it. So I don't really believe that the use cases per se are really going to change with generative AI. I think what we're going to have is more compelling, more powerful features. And, I think there's a lot of proof points already to, the values of AI. Like, who wants to shift through pages and pages of log data? Nobody, but a machine can do that really quickly and efficiently. So it's about using the AI to sift through this vast amounts of data and be able to portray it in a nice, concise dashboard for us to look at and take action. But I do think, when we get to generative AI, I think we're going to really see an incremental leap in the types of capabilities that we're going to be able to see. I think we're going to get to a more predictive model where the generative AI will be able to look at the network configuration and look at the network design and say, okay, I'm predicting there's going to be some kind of outage based on what I'm seeing, or, being able to predict where a breach might occur. So again, it's going to take time to get there, but I think that's kind of the promise of generative AI.
Yeah, Camille, I completely agree. And when you look at the OT areas of organizations, these are traditionally environments that have been underserved by connectivity, or it's sort of been a mishmash of different modalities. And so you're already seeing predictive maintenance being deployed with artificial intelligence for quite some time. What I believe, and I think you hit the nail on the head, generative AI can do is sort of improve the efficacy of that and provide net incremental functionality. So, for example, in years past, AI could be used, with analytics and, combing through all that data to determine if, for example, the part was going to fail on a piece of machinery and prompt the operator to order that part or take that equipment out of service. What generative AI could potentially do is take it to the next level and actually introduce some self-healing. You sort of described that with networking as an example. And again, at the end of the day, it just makes that natural interface with the AI engine that much easier to connect with.
So, are there any solutions that any solution vendors that organizations are really starting to leverage Gen AI that are providing value in the market today? And if so, how are they actually providing value today?
Well, I read there's a really detailed survey out there that McKinsey and Company did. And the survey is actually even a little bit old. So it was done in April of 2023. And it basically went out there and it surveyed a massive amount of enterprises. And they said, and again, if you think of the timeline, generative AI didn't really become widely known until late 2022. So this is only a couple months after. And enterprises that they surveyed, a third of them said they were already using generative AI in at least one business function. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then another 40% of those enterprises said, hey, I think we're going to increase our investment in AI overall because of all these exciting advancements that we're seeing when it comes to generative AI. And, we've seen a number of announcements by large corporations, like obviously Microsoft, right? They own 49% of OpenAI, and they're integrating ChatGPT into Office 365. So we're going to start seeing it emerge in Word and Bing and those types of tools. Salesforce has said they're integrating ChatGPT into their virtual expert. There's been a lot of large retailers that have stated they're planning to use it and adopt it. And in fact, on OpenAI's website, they say they have 80% of the top Fortune 500 enterprises already looking and integrating ChatGPT into their systems. So, even though it is a really, really new technology, I think people are adopting it in a big way.
If they're starting to integrate ChatGPT into some of the like Office 365, I think that explains some of the weird messages I get from my boss. It's robots.
Yeah, I even remember going to Dreamforce, which is Salesforce's conference, like 5 or 6 years ago, and they were talking about their virtual assistant Einstein already having AI into it. So yeah, I mean, even years ago, even before ChatGPT and Bard and the other versions of those AI generators became part of the cultural lexicon, Salesforce and Microsoft were thinking about this.
Yeah, no, for sure. And from my standpoint, focusing on networking and security infrastructure in my firm, I'll kind of state very broadly where I'm beginning to see generative AI really take off is within security solutions. So there are a host of companies, Camille, you mentioned Microsoft with its solution, but you've got a host of security companies that are all going to lean into it. I mean, AIOps has been an integral part of security and networking offerings for that matter. But you're going to start seeing some really, from my perspective, compelling use cases from a security standpoint that, again, are going to allow security analysts, as an example, to have a tool at their disposal so that they can sift through a lot of the alert fatigue. And that's one of the number one challenges that enterprises are faced with, is this whole notion of security alert fatigue. And so what GenAI can do is it can sort of narrow that field, again, through a natural language interface, and provide a more targeted set of vectors for a security analyst to go focus on. So I think you're going to see over the course of this year a lot of announcements from both networking and security infrastructure providers that are going to demonstrate the value of generative AI.
Yeah, and I just to build on that, I think one of the things that's even going to drive that even further is we're now starting to see enterprise offerings around GenAI. Like when GenAI came out, it was a consumer-based application. And now, I think last summer, OpenAI announced ChatGPT for business. And so the whole value prop there is, hey, you can leverage ChatGPT, but your data stays with you. We're not going to incorporate it into our large language model because that is a valid concern, and we'll probably talk more about that. But that enterprise version hasn't been out that long. So again, I I think, a lot of the use cases where we've seen AI play an integral role, we're just going to use generative AI to make those even more powerful and more compelling, plus take on additional roles. Like we've never seen AI being used in a marketing context, but now we're hearing more and more about that.
Yeah, I actually saw there's an account that I follow on LinkedIn that's called Famous Campaigns. And I think it was KitKat did a whole ad that incorporated AI and how you can get it to tell you certain things if you tell it to take a break, right? And it's the whole give me a break, like KitKat thing.
Yeah.
And I was just like, man, they're really on that. But we're going to see more of that, I'm sure.
Well, you can even get a ChatGPT that is a blog brainstormer.
Yeah.
Like who knew that these tools would come to market, but they're coming.
As a kind of a lark, a few months ago, I was talking to our CMO and had ChatGPT generate us a haiku on the value of 5G. We never actually used that as anything, but it was interesting what it came up with after we had it go a couple of times and produce a couple of different haikus.
Yeah, it's got to learn, right? So these large language models need data to train, and it's only going to improve over time. And Camille, you mentioned how early we are into the generative AI journey. I mean, it's amazing to think that it just sort of hit us all back in late 2022. So we're only a year into this, and these models are going to get better with more and more data that's used to train them.
Can I actually share some random stats? Because I saw this LinkedIn post, and I haven't fact checked any of this, but to me it was like, whoa! As soon as I saw this, I was like, okay, we're at the cusp of a really transformative technology. So it was a LinkedIn post, and it actually got picked up and written about in various articles. But it started off with how long it took various technologies to reach saturation of where they got 100 million users. So it started with mobile phones. And mobile phones, it took 16 years to get to 100 million users. With the internet, it took 7 years. So Facebook, as an application, it took 4.5. Instagram, 2.5. TikTok, 9 months.
Wow.
Do you guys want to guess how long it took ChatGPT to get 100 million users?
A month.
I feel like a month.
Yeah, it was actually 2 months.
Oh my
2
God.
months.
That is crazy.
And the headline was ChatGPT is the fastest growing consumer app in the history of the internet.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, okay.
Well, the bellwether for me is my wife is not technical. She's a technician in retina therapy. She asked me about generative AI and ChatGPT. So that was a moment for me that my wife is aware of it as well. So just kind of it kind of demonstrates just how deeply and pervasively generative AI has reached the population in a very short amount of time.
So speaking of that, today, literally this morning, my daughter came to me and she's like, hey, you have to sign these forms for me. So I'm reading through the forms, and as part of what they have to sign and what I have to sign, they have to promise not to use ChatGPT or any other generative AI to do their homework.
That's going to be
Speaking of that,
yeah.
Speaking of that, what's funny though is what kind of other tools that are used that kind of get wrapped up into that, because my daughter actually got a 0 on an assignment because the teacher thought that she was using ChatGPT or something along those lines. And what actually she had done is she'd used Grammarly to help her with correcting things. And the AI detector that they used at the school started picking up Grammarly as an AI, which it technically is. Grammarly is technically an AI that helps you with correcting grammar and sentence structure and those kind of things. So, it's one of those things where those were kind of already there and people were already using them, but now ChatGPT has taken that to another level, which starts to affect other tools that people are relying on as well.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually no secret that some of those tools, like you're talking about grammar-based tools, I'm not going to pick on any one of them, but also translation sites. We think we're using these, But in reality, you have to be somewhat careful because a lot of these websites are part of the training models for generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, controlling employees' usage, not only over generative AI, but also some of the grammar-based tools and translation tools you may need to use in your day-to-day work function that can be feeding corporate data right into these large language models.
Yeah.
This brings up a really good point that, in the landscape of generative AI with all these different tools, like how can enterprises even distinguish between like what has just been delivered to them through an ad versus what can actually give them true benefits? Like how do they determine where the flim
Yeah.
flam is?
I mean, it's a great question. And talk about the unicorns and talk about the money that's going to get thrown at this, like, money that got thrown at the cloud and security for years. And so there's going to be a lot of whitewash. There are going to be a lot of companies and startups that claim they have the best, capability with Gen AI. And my recommendation to enterprises that are starting this journey is like stick with those brands that you're familiar with. You know, those companies that have provided you your IT and OT infrastructure, they're likely working on a generative AI capability that will complement your existing infrastructure, because there are going to be a lot of startups out there that are going to claim they can do X, Y, and Z. And it's going to be confusing for quite some time. I don't know, Camille, if you have any other advice there.
Well, I think you just have to look back in history, right? When AI first emerged and everybody jumped on the AI bandwagon. And I think probably every vendor was like, yeah, we have AI, we have AI. Was it really AI or was it just good machine learning? Probably was just good machine learning. So, the boundaries of the technologies, it's kind of a gray area, and marketers are probably going to push the boundaries. So yeah, it's you have to look beyond the hype for sure. And everything related to Gen AI is hype because it is such an interesting and new technology. But I think it's also really important to focus in on, okay, how could this technology really benefit your particular organization? Pick a use case and maybe pick one and validate it, test it out, and then kind of expand usage.
Camille, you just brought up something that I think it might be good to maybe go a little deeper on for our listeners. What is the difference between machine learning and AI?
Well, okay, so machine learning is basically the algorithms and the sifting through the data. It's more of the manual process per se of learning from, or I wouldn't even say learning, but sifting through data and coming up with conclusions based on the data. I think the difference between machine learning and AI is a little bit blurry, but where it turns into AI is if there's some sort of human intelligence. So generally it's like if the machine is doing any kind of problem solving or reasoning based on that data, that's when it turns into AI. But I think machine learning is the foundation to AI, and then AI kind of builds on that by adding the human intelligence. And, machine learning is the foundation for everything.
And what are the security pitfalls that come with that Gen AI or that AI side of it?
Well, I mean, certainly Gen AI can be a double-edged sword, and I've written about this in the past. I mean, it's going to be used by bad actors to exploit vulnerabilities, to create just obscurity and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, it can be used effectively by IT operators to improve resilience. I spoke to some of the security aspects as well. But I know, Camille, you wanted to get into some more specifics, like around phishing and deepfakes, because it's crazy what these bad actors can do with Gen AI.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it on the head, right? Like malicious actors use social engineering as the most common way to get into a network, and social engineering is gonna be so much harder to detect because we're going to have audio, we're going to have video, and these deep fakes are really hard to determine. So you can imagine, a phishing email with maybe audio or video portraying somebody in a position of authority to get someone to take action quickly. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the whole premise of phishing. Create a sense of urgency, make that person stressed so they have to click on the link now and take action. Yeah. So I think this concept of deep fakes being used to trick people is really going to have security teams on their toes. And then, like as Will said, using generative AI to find new system vulnerabilities. We know like the most dangerous types of cyber attacks are those zero-day exploits. So using generative AI to find those zero-day exploits and, mass produce malware quicker and faster than ever before. And, it's going to take GenAI on the SecOps, AIOps side to help prevent this. So it's almost going to be a war of the machines way into the future.
Yeah, I've read some interesting statistics that have been posted by different security companies. In the range of 50 to 60 to 70% of breaches are identity based. If you look at what happened with the MGM Grand Hotel, that was a ransomware attack that basically completely shut down their Azure environment for over a week. And that was global. That just wasn't in Las Vegas. That was global. Card key access was disabled. There were just a host of issues that were created. And it was rooted in a hack into identity. So we've been talking about GenAI and how these bad actors can use it to their best effort. It's challenging. And so, the white hats are going to have to step up and leverage it very effectively to safeguard and counteract a lot of what, these bad actors are planning to do with it.
Yep. And then there's other security concerns as well. Like if you think of data loss, and again, an organization has employees are, on the web. Maybe they're leveraging these GenAI tools to optimize code or create a compelling marketing message. And the risk is that data then is incorporated into that large language model. It could be spit out in a future response. So I think organizations really kind of need to look broadly at web security and employ things like data loss prevention strategies so that, you're controlling what your employees are putting not only into the Gen AI tools, like into some of the other tools on the web that are feeding the Gen AI tools. So, I think that's going to be really important. And then there's a whole other suite of issues like around copyright. So say I produce through Gen AI, this new piece of content, but it's based on copyrighted material in the large language model, and it's producing something that is too similar to the original, the company can be, in copyright violation. So there's all kinds of implications here.
So how do companies even balance all of that? So they've got this convenient tool, but then they've got all these security hurdles to go through. Like, how do they navigate that?
I think it's about standardizing on, a set of large language models. And, a lot of organizations, that provide IT infrastructure are trying to curate this, NVIDIA is a big player in AI, and they're trying to curate, a lot of these larger language models to make it easier for customers. But from my perspective, it's defining an operational framework, standardizing on an application like ChatGPT or whatever, the large language models that support that, because that will bring more operational, efficiency in that regard. And then also by doing that, you eliminate this whole notion of shadow IT. You'll remember during the early days of the cloud, there were folks involved in developer operations that were just spinning up their own cloud instances because they wanted, that flexibility and that instant gratification. Well, that created a lot of financial hardship, number one, but number two, it created vulnerabilities within the organization because it created all of these gaps within the network perimeter. So I think that's the best way for enterprises to approach that, Taylor. Camille, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's getting easier for enterprises to really look at adopting generative AI with these enterprise versions that are coming to market. But I also think, having the right policies in place and making sure those policies are enforceable.
So taking a cue from another emerging technology, facial recognition, right? There's a lot of talk around that, around biases in that technology against people of color, right? How are there biases that are starting to unfortunately be, whether implicit or explicit, built into AI models today? And how can that affect businesses' implementation of AI?
So I'll actually read you a headline of a Bloomberg article that says humans are biased, Gen AI is worse. And again, that's a pretty broad statement, but I think the point they were trying to make is Gen AI is based on human data. So, whether there's inadvertent biases or unconscious biases in the data, it's human generated data. So it's not surprising that the Gen AI will adopt whatever's in the data. And I think too, the danger with Gen AI is maybe just amplification of those biases. So I think it is something that we as a society have to solve, and I don't know how to solve for it, but there was also a call by a lot of the Silicon Valley tech giants. I think it was a number of months ago, maybe 6 months ago, where they were calling for a halt on generative AI to take into consideration these biases and ethics considerations, because the technology is moving so fast. But all of these things need to be cared for.
Yeah, I read that as well, Camille. And, there's this new notion of AI hallucinations, if you can believe that. And a lot of these biases affect hallucinations. So this is like reasoning that gets generated out of, AI that is not logical, that could be potentially dangerous, right? And so I think a lot of the emphasis around those Silicon Valley companies coming together is we need to define this framework to ensure that it's ethically used, number one, and number two, that it doesn't become weaponized. And I even read something around how the military, in the United States is very interested in AI for obvious reasons, but there's hesitance there because there doesn't there's a desire to not allow that to become weaponized. And so, yeah, I mean, it's early days, and I think we're learning weekly and monthly about how we manage all of this.
Yep. Yep.
So we've talked about the hurdles and the biases and all these considerations that come with Gen AI. What advice would you guys offer to enterprise businesses who are really aiming to better understand and engage with these tools?
Yeah, I think there's no shortage of research to be done. There's a lot of material out there. And again, I think now is kind of the time for enterprises to start looking at how they can take advantage of these technologies, because there are enterprise versions now of generative AI kind of circumventing some of the data loss concerns. So, and again, I think it comes down to, where are you going to get your biggest bang for your buck? Like, do you want to do more customer service automation? Do you have a large contact center? That's always been a massive sweet spot for AI. So maybe it's leveraging generative AI as part of that, as a starting point, and proving it out, and then looking at other use cases.
Yeah, and I think it starts with defining what the problem statement is, or, Camille, to your point, what you want to prove versus I need generative AI deployed, right? Because that's sort of going in the backwards from my perspective. So think about, as a business, what you're engaged in, delivering services, manufacturing goods, determine what could be improved, and then do the research around, well, how can generative AI help me accomplish those objectives, drive better business outcomes, ultimately deliver better service to the customers that they serve and support over time.
So based on your research, we're going to kind of start to wrap up a little bit here, but I'm curious what you guys think. What trends or shifts do you anticipate in Gen AI's relationship with enterprise tech? Originally I was thinking in the coming years, but as quickly as this moves, I almost want to say like tomorrow or like
Well,
Well, I'll take that real quickly. It's a broad statement, but I think you're going to begin to see it become integrated more deeply in the various technology stacks from a security and networking perspective. You've already seen that occur. I mean, AIOps is something that's been around within networking frameworks for quite some time and security frameworks, but I just think you're going to see a deeper embeddedness of that. And certainly if you look at, the latest news, and I mean, look at the big announcement around HPE wanting to acquire Juniper Networks. And a lot of that is driven around Juniper's AI capabilities. They've been very early to market with their Marvis agent, and HPE sees the value in spending billions of dollars to acquire that technology versus develop it over a number of different years. So, yeah, so from my perspective, what you're going to see, because I'm the boring infrastructure guy, but you're just going to see it more, AI, generative AI, more tightly integrated into network infrastructure, and that's just going to make it simpler for IT operators to consume.
Yep, I agree. I agree. I think generative AI is going to emerge in so many different facets of both our professional and our personal lives, and some of which we can predict because AI has been playing a role in those different technologies, like such as AIOps and SecOps and contact centers and customer service automation. But what is interesting again are some of these new use cases that are emerging and using machines as a creative source. Like, who would have ever thought we would get there? But here we are. I mean, I guess the good news is that humans have one thing machines won't ever have, and that's a gut instinct.
Right.
So I think we'll just see them become more and more of our daily lives, like in a similar way that you see that already occurring in places like Korea and Japan.
Well, Will and Camille, we've taken up a good chunk of your time, so I want to thank you for joining us to chat about this very rapid evolution of Gen AI. But before we let you go, Will, where can our listeners find more information about Moor Insights and Strategy and the work you do?
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. So I'm very visible on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days. So my handle is at Will Town Tech. And moorinsightsandstrategy.com is our firm's website. And we are publishing just an incredible amount of content to that platform. So I would encourage your listeners to check both my handle and our firm's website out.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We appreciate the chat.
Thank you.
I loved this episode. I think it's so interesting because AI is growing so quickly, and I loved the stats that Camille shared about the adoption rate. Even when she started talking about the McKinsey report, and she said, this is sort of an older report. It's from like 2022 or 2023. And I'm like, that was like yesterday, which it was crazy to me to hear her say it's older, but in the scheme of this, it really is.
Yeah, it's funny to think about, ChatGPT, Bard, those things came into the lexicon, into kind of the common knowledge, like Will and Camille mentioned, not more than probably a little more than a year ago. But if you think about, how long it's been around, I remember back in 2016, Microsoft developed a AI Twitter bot called Tay, and they had to take it offline after 16 hours because, we talked about biases. It was feeding off so much negativity from social media that it started making inappropriate and racist posts, so that Microsoft had to immediately, 16 hours later, pull it off because there was just so much of that vitriol and bias that it ingested into its learning model that created those issues. So, I think I find it I find it interesting how far it's come, but I also find it disheartening that even, what is that, 8 years later, AI still has the same pitfalls that it did in the very early days, and it seems that we're not making those generational leaps to fix some of those pitfalls. The other thing that I think was very interesting was it reminded me of a movie, and I'm going to paraphrase the movie, right? Does AI dream of electric sheep? Right, from Blade Runner.
Yeah.
It's just funny that how it can make its own leaps after it started to ingest all that and learning. Like, it can do things that were unexpected. It can start learning and creating, connections where the developers didn't expect it. And that's, I think, the true next generation of AI is not just ingesting different information, content, and then being able to create a new version of that content. Like Camille, mentioned, asking it to write, a value statement around a product or things like that, and then just resynthesizing stuff that's already out there. It's going to be able to create its own ideas and its own thoughts. And I think that, not to, get way too far out in the future, but, it's going to be one of those things where it's like, when and if, AI creates its own sentience, right? Mm-hmm. But, all of those things are like way out in the future. I think, if anything, the one thing that I want people to take away from this episode is, AI is here, and it's in whether you as a business are more conservative and risk averse, and don't really want to adopt it as part of your business, or you're the thought leadership in your market and you're looking on ways to leverage it. Either way, it's here and you can't ignore it. So you have to create policies, because your employees are going to use it, whether you really want them to or not. And then the bad guys are going to use it, right? And so if you're not thinking about AI as part of your IT or SecOps philosophies, I think you're going to have to, because the bad actors are definitely using AI, and they're definitely going to use it to their advantage. And so, the good guys need to look to use it to their advantage as well.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for listening to What's Your Signal? If you enjoyed today's AI discussion, be sure to subscribe, rate our episode, and visit cradlepoint.com to learn more.